I think I'll start. I hope everybody slept well, and did the barbecue end up happening? I went home and I fell asleep, so I didn't go back. But oh, okay, and you made it for the barbecue?
At the very, very end.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I hope it was good. Okay, so I know we started talking about aspect just a little bit yesterday at the end, but we'll come back to that in a little bit. And also, so for this morning, I think we have basically another hour and 10 minutes to kind of finish up this stuff, and then Bert is going to talk about Chinese AMR, UMR. Okay, so the discourse relations, so this is what you'd use anytime you have multiple clauses interacting with each other in a sentence, sometimes across sentences. It's helpful to use it. And also, some of these are used to join entities too, so conjunctions. These are also arranged into a lattice, so you can use whatever gradation makes sense for your language. I mean, certainly if you don't have a language that conflates, and but together, don't try to use that, it will be weird. And then some of these roles, they actually do fit into the discourse relation hierarchy here, but you've seen them before in the non-participant roles. And then some of these are actually not in the non-participant role list, they're only in this list. So, let's see. Actually, you know what? I have an image that is not in here that I want to find. This is what I'm looking for. Okay, so here, so what the colors are doing, they've mapped out the space to show you what the discourse relations we had in AMR were and how they map onto this. So in AMR, for contrast, in English, like but phrases, we have contrast 01. That covers kind of this whole region, and which covers a lot of this, and or. Purpose, substitution, conditions, exceptions. So we've gotten more fine-grained with it. We have exclusive and inclusive disjunctions. Hold on, let me go back to my examples. Sorry, I'm still getting rolling this morning. Okay. Okay, so you'll find them all in here. I don't know how much detail, since we have limited time. I probably won't go through every single one of these, but you can spend more time in this. It's on the webpage. There are a lot of new ones that were things that we didn't have to think about in AMR. The apprehensive is an interesting one. So 2 events are mutually exclusive alternates. 1 event is carried out with the intention of preventing the other event. So it's kind of like a purpose, but a negative purpose. Let's see.
So is it based on any framework, for example, PDTB or RST or any other framework like this, the list of discourse relations?
So Bill Croft is the one who designed this lattice, and I'm not sure what framework he used. It might have just been his own.
Is there any paper on that, maybe?
That
would be very useful.
Yeah, oh, on that note, I forgot to mention, so in the where's our folder? This is not our folder. So in the folder for the UMR group, I've added a new document to it.
Maybe such a recent, because we opened it on.
UMR Summer School. Is that it? No. This, no. Is it this one? Yeah, okay. So I added this slideshow to it. We've also added this document. I haven't gone through and updated it yet. I made it so everybody can also edit, so if you want to add things to it, you can. This is defunct, so don't try to go to that AMR editor. The old AMR editor, which was a really useful resource even for using UMR just because of background, it's not hosted anymore in its original place, but it is on the UMR website now. So I'll update the link. But we've got links to the UMR resources, we've got links to the English prep bank role sets, which also includes the, you can look up all of the -91 role sets on that page. And then there's a reading list that, so like I said, I haven't updated it yet, but it's got all of these publications that are about UMR on it. And I know, to answer your question about Bill's framework and background for the discourse relations, he has sent me just links to a bunch of papers that were related, so I'll add those too. Yeah, I know some people yesterday were interested in just background reading on semantics, and Alexis, I was actually going to ask you if you wanted to contribute any like general background papers for people who don't have a background in semantics, if you have any ideas. Yeah, I know, I was thinking about it too, I wasn't sure which ones to add. But yeah, so if anyone has papers that they think would be interesting or resources, like feel free to add things to this document. So I just wanted to mention that's up there now. All right, I was looking for something. I don't remember what it was. I mean, I guess we can just look at some of these examples. So, like, here's an interesting one. So you've got the pure addition relation. So there's no temporal specification, no difference temporally between the two events, but they're occurring as a complex figure together. Like, you have to have both of them together. If they're ordered temporally, you can use a consecutive concept. But if they're not ordered temporally, then you can use this pure addition rule. But there are a couple different ways to do it. In the guidelines, they actually show that you can still just use and for these relations also. But that's because it's in the lattice, and this falls under the and category. But if you're going to use a role, you could do it that way. You don't have to use the role. You can also use the -91 role set. I think I tend to use the -91 role sets a little bit more often for these, just as like a top node. Substitution, instead of going out to eat, we barbecued chicken at home. Unexpected co-occurrence, so that would be a specific kind of contrast. Concessions, even though he was broke, he bought a new guitar. Concessive condition, that's new from AMR. So even if you arrive only 5 minutes late, you'll be fired. And then subtraction. So exceptions. Is there anything about discourse relations that anybody really wants to go over to like today, or can we just like leave this as something to investigate further?
Everything.
Everything?
Yes. So these are established at the document level, right? Not the sentence level?
These are actually at the sentence level.
Sentence level?
Yeah. Yeah, so like here.
Clause.
Yeah.
All in cases of having
Yeah.
complex sentence. Like
Yeah, complex sentences, interclausal relations within a sentence. And sometimes, you know, the way you have your document set up and the way your language is, I mean, it might be that you have two sentences that are split into two different lines for annotation, but you really want to show that they're connected together. You can use these to join between
And
sentences.
in terms of arguments, do you consider an argument the clause, or
Yeah.
I can have, for instance, event that is a nominalization, and then have a relation between a nominalization and a clause, for instance?
Yeah. Yeah.
But do you have specific rules about how to annotate discourse relations on the guidelines or
I mean, specific rules and.
in terms of what is considered the argument of a discourse relation?
So.
If two clauses can be linked by more than one discourse relation, things like that.
I don't know. I don't know how you would do it with multiple discourse relations. Probably you would just pick one, and I mean, structurally it's the same as any other kind of relation. And you can reference the dash line rules. You've got one argument is going to be the main clause, and then the other argument will be the secondary clause, the subordinate clause or conjunctive clause.
But you can also establish discourse relations at the document level between sentences that are not agents to.
Yeah, I mean, so let's see. What would be a good example? I mean, like in the Minecraft data, for example, I mean, there are a lot of disfluencies and there are a lot of just fragments that are kind of, you could put them together into a single sentence if you wanted to, but they're spread out over multiple sentences. And sometimes you'll have one sentence and then the next sentence will start with but. I mean, you can use those to join rows. But.
And in terms of graphs, because if we imagine that we annotate a document with all these layers, then this would also be represented, the discourse relations, in terms of the graph.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you have, hold on, I want to find contrast. Oh, I don't have an example. Nope. Still good? Okay, there's contrast. So, if it's split across sentences, so say that this is one sentence and then this is the next sentence below, probably I would annotate this sentence, because it's the first one, I would just have this arc, I wouldn't include contrast in that graph. And then the next graph, I would have the contrast rule set. I would have arg1, and then I would probably just have in parentheses like event as a kind of a stub. And then the arg2 for this clause. And then in the co-reference section of the document level, I would put co-reference between the event and then this.
So you can have these labels arg also for the parts that are connected by the discourse relations, and you use argument also for the arguments of a verbal predicate. When, for instance, if we annotate this and then we want to extract all the annotation, wouldn't that be confusing to have the same label but for different layers of the annotation?
How so?
When you extract all the information, you will have this list, and then we'll have argument for discourse relation, but also arguments in terms of verbal predicates. I don't know if that's a problem. I'm imagining the kind of annotation I do. We do this annotation, then we extract information and using DRS, but and so we have all these tags, and I don't know if it is the case for UML.
So I was just looking again at the guidelines, but there is a big section in the guidelines about discourse relations with some references to, excuse me. So what the guidelines say is that they're based on prior typological research and also some of Bill's work. So there are some definitions of the relations. But the thing that stood out to me, and you have to tell me if this is still the case, is that according to the guidelines, these are meant to be used really for complex sentences and not so much for relations between sentences in the document.
Yeah, you don't have to link sentences through the document this way. I mean, it's really only something that you would do if you felt like there really is a strong relationship between the two sentences. It's not like you need to have these between every two. Yeah.
So it sounds to me, and I haven't done this annotation myself, but it sounds to me like it's capturing the intersentential, intrasentential relations, but not inter. It's not aiming to provide scope for all intersentential relations.
Right.
Okay.
But I have an observation while working on languages that these discourse level information can be within the complex sentence and across sentences.
Of course.
And they are same.
Yeah.
And now since it is semantic representation, so I am assuming that different kinds of structure can be generated. So like conditional, for example, I can have if-then sentence, and I can also have, like in my language, I can have two different sentences.
Yeah.
And that is also possible because since it is semantic representation,
Of course.
all different kind of generation should be possible.
Yeah.
So therefore, we do not need to really differentiate between across sentence discourse relation and within sentence discourse.
Yeah, but there are some rules that are different. If you are annotating only inside the sentence and across sentences, there are certain rules that we need to establish. For instance, can we only establish discourse relations between sentences that are sequential, or can we establish between sentences that are separated by others? And can an argument have 2, 3, or more sentences or not? That kind of
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, okay. Sorry, I think I was missing that before. Okay. So yes, and I know the guidelines do specify that it's supposed to be within a sentence. However, not all languages have strict rules about what a sentence is in the same way that English does, for example. And we've run into that with the Arapaho in particular. I mean, the way that Andy has chosen to divide up the sentences in his glossing a lot of times, I mean, it's not arbitrary, but you could do it in a lot of different ways. There's not a fixed punctuation that says the sentence is over now. There tend to just be like discourse markers. He's just made choices about where to split them up. So sometimes with the Arapaho, I really do want to put a discourse relation to link two sentences together. And I'm calling them sentences. I know it's I wish there was a slightly better word, but
That's why there are some frameworks that don't define discourse relations in terms of sentence, but in terms
Yeah.
of situations.
right. Yes.
Discourse relations between situations, and then a situation can be represented by a sentence, by a clause, by nominalization. Whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And that's part of why I'm saying that once you kind of get rid of this fixed idea of what sentence is, then really you're having to do what makes the most sense for your language. And if you feel like there is a discourse relation that is meaningful that you want to represent, and it is between two sentences that aren't sequential, I think it's okay to add it. And if you want to add a discourse relation that has, one sentence is kind of the parent and then multiple sentences in the second argument, what you would do is you would make like a parent node, like an and node or some kind of node that you can use as the head node and then create like a set member relationship between that node and each of the individual sentences that you want to group under that second argument. Did that make sense?
Yes, it does, but my problem is that I think it was at the beginning of yesterday, you said that this has been used for several languages and several languages do different kind of additions to this scheme. And the problem is that if you don't define, from my perspective, if you don't define the rules for as many situations as possible, as many languages as possible, when you want to compare them, this is going to be a problem, right?
I mean, I'm not sure how much of a problem it actually is. At the end of the day, AMR really was annotating individual sentences. But with UMR, because you have document level graphs and with co-reference that you're building up, you kind of end up with one large graph at the end. I mean, it doesn't look like one large graph, but it's all interconnected.
But if, for instance, in this case, if one language decides that is going to annotate discourse relations across sentence and the other doesn't, so if we want to compare how the different languages behave in terms of discourse relations, the criteria is going to be different. So we won't be able to compare them, right?
I'm not sure that that's any more detrimental than any of the other language-specific annotation choices that you have to make with anything else. There's always going to be some degree of difference just because of the way the languages express things differently. I don't know. I mean, you'll have to tell me if this is something that you work closely with. I mean, you may say like, oh, it really is a problem.
I think it is.
But the point, I mean, I think in my mind, it's not that you want to use like an and, like something like an and relation. You wouldn't want to use an and relation to just join every single sentence together. But if some of these much more specific kinds of relations, if you have strong contrast that you feel is really important, and that the two sentences really could have been one. If it was just a speaker stylistic choice to split it up into two sentences, but they're really expressing contrast, it is probably worth still putting the contrast in between the two sentences. I mean, the point with all of this is really to try to get at the heart of the speaker's intent and their meaning rather than morphosyntactic choices they've made in the structure of their dialogue.
For discourse relations, because all these examples are of explicit discourse relations, but we can also annotate implicit without discourse connectives, right?
Wait, sorry, say it again.
All of the examples that you have here have a connective, but the explicit discourse relations. UMR also provides instructions for annotation of implicit discourse relations.
That is where it starts to get a little murky. It depends on, I mean, it's kind of a continuum. So the more implicit the discourse relation is, the less likely you'll probably be to want to insert this kind of thing, unless you feel like it's really strongly understood by the communicators that there is this strong contrast or something going on. If you really feel that it's important to the meaning, then go ahead and add it. But if it's implicit, if it's explicitly in there, if you have a sentence that starts with even though and it joins it to the previous sentence, if it's explicit, it makes sense to add it. If it's not explicit, then you kind of back off a little bit, I think. But I know it's not a hard and fast rule. This is one of the hardest things with UMR I'm finding though, because with AMR, it was very easy to make a lot of strict conventional rules that you could follow. But what ended up happening is that most of those strict rules fell back on something syntactic. And as soon as you start falling back on something syntactic, then the rule doesn't apply to all the languages differently. And so trying to strip that stuff away and get back to, well, what is the actual meaning that the speakers are trying to convey? I mean, it's hard. And every time I try to come up with rules, they're never like strict, hard and fast rules. I feel silly like being up here and being like, well, follow your heart. What do you think they meant? You know, but then that kind of is what you have to do, and that's the best way to get agreement between annotators too in the end, which seems counterintuitive, but I don't know. Any other questions about discourse relations? I mean, we have like other things to get through this morning still, so but we can talk more and work with more examples in the hands-on sessions later.
I'm sorry, I just have maybe a quick question. Do you know if UMR has been used for argument mining? So far?
I'm not sure. Bert, do you have an answer for that?
Used for
For argument mining.
target mining.
Yeah. Because I was wondering in terms of discourse relations across different sentences, because that would be probably one of the main usages. of this
Yeah,
definition.
You mean argument in the sense of like the argumentation for example?
To see the argumentation structure for a long type of discourse.
I'm not aware of any. I think it's still very, you have to have developed automatic constructs first. Like,
Yes.
there has not been all of that.
I do know there's one thing that'll be interesting to look at once we have more done. There's a team, Nick Asher and I don't remember. Yes, yes. They've done the entire Minecraft corpus with DRT relations between all the different sentences. So, yeah, I mean, obviously that's a layer that's much more designed to get at the intersentential relationships. But I think it'll be interesting to see how that compares to any of this stuff. Okay, so the next thing that we should talk about is the non-prototypical predication. So this is what I mentioned before. So not all languages express clauses using verbs. Some languages use juxtaposition, two nouns placed next to each other, and it creates clausal meaning. And the copula is also counted under this. So like in AMR for English, we did not have a role set for B. We used a domain relation between the predicating element and the subject. So we've gotten rid of domain and we've replaced it with these role sets. So basically there are, 6 different semantic types, and it's a little bit fuzzy. So these used to be called nonverbal predication, but sometimes you want to use these when it is verbal predication. It's actually the semantic types that we're trying to get at here. So possession, location, property predication, so that's like property, modifiers, properties. Equational relationships, and then object predication, which object predication I think is a really tricky category and a tricky name. It ends up feeling like a syntactic distinction. I think that trying to decide between property predication and object predication is one of the hardest things we've had to do in retrofitting the English data. Because you can really have the same idea conveyed, and whether you choose to use an adjective or a nominalized form of the same idea, it shouldn't be dictating, that's syntactic, that shouldn't be dictating which role set you use. But object predication, it covers categorical relationships, so I am Muslim, I am a king. It's tempting to think about it like, oh, well, if you're equating yourself to some kind of category noun, that usually falls into that category, but that's too syntactic. Anyway, okay, so these are separate from each other. They're also kind of mini lattices, well, they're not lattices, I guess, that one's kind of a lattice, but they have finer grained and coarser grained options that you can use. Possession, let's see. Possession's pretty straightforward. The difference between thetic possession and predicative possession. So thetic is, where is my, I always say it backwards, so I want to make sure I'm reading my notes right. I've lost my, oh no, okay, cool, I'm sorry. I went out of my slideshow, that's what happened. Oh, I don't have notes. I think I deleted my notes. All right. Oh, you know what? I have it defined down here. Okay. So thedic possession, you have the possessor in focus. You have, if you have a language where one of the arguments is turned into the verb, it's going to be the possession argument that is turned into the verb. So this example here, oh, that covers it up. So, oh no, there it is. Okay. So in this one, there's no part of speech marked, but the canoe has actually been turned into the verb, I believe. So thedic and predicative, we have the same alternation with possession and also with location. And it's the only place in AMR where not AMR, in UMR, where we pay attention, where you can pay attention to which information is new information and which information is old information. It turns out this is really, really hard to annotate in English. It's really hard. It's just really hard to do. We have verbs that show this distinction for possession in English. So like thedic possession aligns with the verb have. So the teacher has a dog, and predicative possession aligns with the verb belong. So the dog belongs to me. But it's not, outside of those verbs, it's very hard to try to track which information is old and new in a lot of cases. So anyway, that's part of why we have decided, and this is a change from last year. It used to be that you had to choose between a have 91 and a belong 91, but now we have a parent category where you don't have to choose between the two. So if you don't want to try to distinguish thedic from predicational, you don't need to. And that is the same with location.
I think this distinction would be helpful for identifying topic focus.
Yeah, and if that's something that you really do want to capture, then it's really important to have it. The thing that's interesting about it is that we don't do that anywhere else in UMR. So it's, and location, so I think before, we had a lot of hang-ups last year. Before we just had a have, I think it was called have location and exist. But existence is also kind of its own thing.
So it's more contextual information. So it is actually then bringing in another layer on your semantic representation.
Yeah.
Context.
Yeah, exactly.
Even if we bring topic and focus.
Yeah. The reason that it's so important to do it, though, and the reason that, and this is another Billcroft construction here, is just because there are so many languages that actually do make this distinction, and when they do, you have to be able to
Languages do it very much.
Yeah. So the rule now is, if you want to distinguish this topic focus stuff, use these finer grade ones. If you don't, use the higher level ones. And for exist only has one argument, so you only want to use it with constructions like there is a God, where you're asserting the existence of a thing. But if you said there is a God in the sky with a beard or something, if it has extra adverbials added on, then don't use the exist rule set. And I know this is one of those kind of syntactic rules that we've tried not to have too many of in UMR, but that's what we decided.
So what would the second one be rooted by?
There
is a God in the sky with a beard.
That one you would do have place.
Okay.
And I think I have down here some examples. I hope I have them here. I have them somewhere else. They're not here. Yeah, the knife is in the drawer, so that one we've got have place. Rock has a sigil on it. That one is, if you're using the thedic, you would use that one. There was another example. It was like there were good seeds from good plants, and and bad seeds from bad plants. And we spent a long time talking about that. But there are good seeds from good plants. We decided we would use have source as the parent. So whatever that secondary adverbial is, we bump that up to the main predicate, I guess. Okay, so going back up, property predication. There was a lot of discussion about this one early on. There's been a lot of argument through the years of whether you should have rule sets at all for adjectives. And of course, properties aren't always expressed through adjectives. In Arapaho, they're all verbs. So what we've decided to do is let languages decide if you want to create like a lexical rule set for your properties. If you do, then use your rule set. And if you don't, but it's a predicating property, then use this one. And if it's not predicating, you would just use mod. Equational, so these are identity relations, just pure equivalence. And then object predication, so these two are from UMR. We've changed the number because we've changed the number to argument. They used to start at 0 and now they start at 1. But yeah, have rule 91 is the more general version. Most of the time you don't have this optional second entity. Usually it's just for things like I am Muslim or they are great men. And there are more examples in here. Does anybody have any questions about these in particular? There will be lots of questions when you actually get into like trying to apply these. Okay, so now I think we can go back. Well, how much time do we have? About half an hour before it's up. Aspects, we looked at the last a little bit yesterday. I do want to mention there are a lot of fine-grained categories you can deal with aspect if you want to. You can also, it's actually recommended that if you're just starting out with aspect, that you just stick with kind of these main categories. So state, performance is going to cover achievements and accomplishments, and probably incentives. Habitual. Process is the trickiest one because process is the word that it's just any unspecified kind of event. So it's probably what most people would call an event in most literature, and it's just anything that isn't a state, basically. And the important thing to say about that, so there are a lot of cases where you have nominalized events. And there are a lot of times with nominalized events where you actually do get a feel for what the aspect is of that event, but that's more of a lexical aspect situation. And you can use a more specific kind of aspect anytime you feel like you're certain about it, but if you're really not certain that there's a specific aspect trying to be communicated, you can just use process. So it's kind of like a default option for events. Activities and then endeavors, so the difference between an endeavor and a performance is that endeavors end, but they haven't reached like an actual terminus. So they're done, but they're maybe not complete. There we go. So I think the two main things we still need to go over are the modal strength, and then the document level graph. So I've saved modal for last. It took me several years of working with this to finally understand that the modal strength relation, it's not actually a part of the finished UMR graphs. Its intention is that it's kind of a shortcut. So when you're doing your sentence level annotation, every time you have an event, a UMR event, which we'll define that, you add this modal strength to it, and then it gets digested by the UMR writer and turned into a document level annotation. So So the most important one is modal strength. So basically you have 6 different main values. You've got whole, partial, and neutral that can apply to both negative and affirmative polarities. And this is the primary place that you mark polarity. If you have an explicit polarity element like the word not, you also use a polarity negative role. But basically the way, when you're annotating modal strength at the sentence level, gosh, I don't have the, these rollovers aren't working. Okay, so that's frustrating. So basically, the modal strength, you're defining some cognizer's attitude towards the event. And the cognizer, a lot of times, is the author. The default is that it's the author, so you're gonna mark the author's attitude towards pretty much any event that is in the text. But you can also have cognizers that are other people. When you're doing it at the sentence level, you don't worry about who the cognizer is, you just worry about the strength. So regular declarative active sentences are full affirmative. Once you get into weaker modality, you start to get into the partial and the neutral. So neutral is going to be anything that is like a possibility, an ability. Conditional phrases all get marked neutral. Hopes and fears. There are special rules for modalizing verbs, which we'll talk about in a second. Partial is going to be, like imperatives are going to be partial. Go to Santa Fe. Probability, the dog probably barked last night. And need, like Mary needs to go to Santa Fe. So if you have, oh good, that one works, okay. With modalizing predicates like want, you're gonna add a modal strength. You actually don't have to add a modal strength though. So this is when you're doing your sentence level annotation. This is actually also a shortcut for the writer. The writer will digest this. So the argument of the modal predicate, you're always gonna put that in the complement clause of the modalizing predicate. And it's always gonna link back to the variable for the modalizing verb. What the UMR writer does is it takes this and it automatically generates a value. It knows that the arg0 of the modalizing verb is going to be the cognizer of this clause. And the idea is that you're going to have information built into your lexical files, if you have full sets, that tells you what the modal strength for the complement clause is based on what this verb is. And we do it, oh, I wish I had a list here. We do it for, with the question.
You have 2 of them in the same sentence, so take your example, the dog didn't bark last night, thank God.
Didn't bark last night. Oh gosh.
It's negative, but it's also positive. That
Because
is, the
of-
speaker is sort of doing 2 things.
Yeah, that's interesting.
It wouldn't just be polarity, right?
Well, there's kind
Yeah.
of 2 polarities going on.
I don't think we do that one.
So the thank God is kind of commentary on
And that is pragmatic level information.
the main part of the sentence.
Again, another layer. It's a pragmatic level information.
Yeah, I think that you can actually nest it. That's
Yeah,
part
so
of,
that's what I'm really getting at.
yeah, and that's part of the reason we didn't have this originally, but I have run into cases where we have needed to have this reified rule set because you need to have a way to nest these. So if you run into a situation like that, you can nest them through this rule set just by having 2. I want to write that down because I feel like we should like,
You can, there's all kinds of
yeah.
things you can add.
Mhm.
Unfortunately,
Yeah.
et cetera. You can play it both ways, obviously.
Yeah, I think that you would have to do one modal strength for the first clause and then a separate one for
Yeah.
the secondary statement on it. And then the other thing, this works very much like the modal predicate. If you have a quote, so this gets into the cognizers. If you're quoting somebody, the thing that they say becomes a thing that they have an attitude about. So you'll put, it's just the same as this one. So you'll put the quote relation, its value is going to be the variable for the speaking verb or the speaking predicate. And the UMR writer will automatically digest this and know that this R0, the speaking predicate, is going to be the cognizer for that. So it'll generate that value. And when we look at the document level graph in a minute, we'll see that. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at the document level graph. There we go. Okay, so we're just going to skip down to the modal because we were just talking about modal. Okay, so the document level graph, it's always going to have, the variable is going to be S0. And with all of the variables, it's not actually up there, but there's always a sentence number prefix that's put on that. So if it's the first sentence, it'll be S1, S0. And sentence is always going to be that top node. And then these are the three arguments, co-ref, temporal, and modal. And it's a slightly different kind of graph than the regular Penman notation because you've got like nested parentheses in there. But they're all going to be triples. They're all going to have a relation in the middle, and then for modal, this is always going to be your top root node. You've got a root modal relationship, and then the author. One thing, and this isn't in the guidelines yet, and we still are working on group consensus for how to handle dialogues, but I have dialogues in my Arapaho data, and what I've been doing, so we actually, in the metadata for the dialogues, there are author codes for who's speaking for each sentence. So it'll be like author 2, author 62. So I'm actually using those codes down here. So this, in my data, it'll say author 2 or author 3 or whatever. So for most sentences, you're going to establish this, and then this just says cognizer to point out what it is, but it'll usually say author, and then the modal strength that was in the sentence level annotation gets turned into the relation there. And then that'll be the variable for the event that has the modal strength. If you have a cognizer who isn't the author, then the first thing you do, you have the author who affirms that there is the new speaker, so you use the variable for that speaker. No, I don't have an example of it here, I need to add it. But then, okay, so once you establish that the author is affirming that there is a secondary cognizer, then the next annotations down, you'll have that variable for that cognizer in this position, and then their modal strength relationship to the event. Two special cases that you don't worry about at the sentence level, but you do worry about at the document level. And the other thing I want to note, so so the UMR writer does digest the modal strengths and generate values for you, but you do need to go through in the editor and actually double check that the cognizers are what you want. Okay, but anyway, with conditions, if you have a conditional relationship between two clauses, you're going to have this format. So it'll say author, this is always going to be neutral affirmative. There's a neutral affirmative relationship to have condition. That's always going to say have condition. And then the have condition is going to have a relationship to the first clause, and it's gonna have a relationship to the second clause. So each of those clauses in the condition phrase might have its own modal strength that isn't neutral affirmative. So in these two slots, you're gonna put whatever the modal strength is for the clause itself. And I think I have examples. No, do I? Yeah. Ah, there we go, okay, we do that one. Okay, so can you read that at all? It's like way too small. Is that a little better?
Yes.
Okay. So, if, let's see, if she's hungry, is this part, that's the condition, I'll probably cook pasta. So, cooking pasta is partial affirmative because it's probably. If she's hungry, if she is hungry, not if she's maybe hungry, but if she is definitely hungry, I will probably cook pasta. So that one's a full affirmative and that one's a partial affirmative. So down here you've got the author, neutral affirmative for the condition, full affirmative for the H, because this one is full affirmative, and then neutral affirmative, oh, that's supposed to say partial. That's supposed to say partial. Partial affirmative for the first clause. Does that make sense? And then, it's similar with purpose, but it's less complicated. So with purpose clauses, the purpose clause itself is always going to be partial affirmative. And the main clause, I think let's look at it. Yeah, okay. So they dropped water in order to fight the fire. So purpose is in order to fight the fire. They dropped the water. They dropped the water is full affirmative. Even though this says full affirmative in there, down, is it supposed to say full affirmative in there? This is new to me also. Oh, okay. So the D is the dropping the water. So the author is affirming that there is a dropping water event. They're affirming that there is a person who is going to do the dropping of the water. And because this is that person's purpose, that person becomes the cognizer of the purpose clause. So SP for person, partial affirmative to purpose, and then purpose, full affirmative to the purpose clause. So I think the modal strength is the most complicated part of the document level graph, just in terms of the structure. Co-reference is pretty straightforward. The strangest thing about the document level graph is that for co-reference and temporal, you actually read them right to left, which is different from the sentence level graph. So if you have, it doesn't matter for same entity and same event, obviously. So those are just identity relationships. When you're making co-reference, you're going to make co-reference just between any entity in your sentence and then the previous mention of that entity. So those, it doesn't matter what order, but for subset of the parent, no, let's see. So V1 is the member and V2 is the set. And it's the same with temporal. So before and after and contained are the ones where it matters. So V1 is contained in V2. V1 is after V2. Bert is a great person to ask about the temporal dependency. It's based on his previous project. Basically, for temporal dependency, you're going to have a temporal marker for every event in your sentence and also for every temporal expression. And the way they get entered into the timeline varies a little bit. So you can have relationships between two events. You can have a relationship between an event and a temporal expression. You can have a relationship between two temporal expressions, or if they're vague temporal expressions, you can have a relationship between the event and like a general reference period. And also the easiest way to establish tense is by relating things to the document creation time. You can also establish tense by relating events to a reference event if you need to. But, so the example, oh yeah, and then if you have absolute time expressions like dates, like May 5th, you're gonna connect May 5th to a root instead. So here are some examples. So Pope was in remission from a rare form of bone cancer when he was arrested in Russia. 7A is the arrest. So the important thing to note, we don't have fine-grained temporal relations at the sentence level. All we have is this general temporal marker. So if you want to get more specific, you have to do that at the document level. So the arrest was before C, that is wrong. No. That's from a previous sentence. We don't have the previous sentence. Okay, the arrest was before an event in a previous sentence. And that's how you demonstrate that you're moving the timeline along from sentence to sentence.
But the temporal relation between was arrested and was in remission,
That should probably be in there. Oh, no. Yeah, it is in there. Okay. This is a weird graph to me. The way I would have done this, so Pope was in remission, I would have just used remission as the top node. I think this came from the guidelines. And I think when it was written for the guidelines, I think that the annotator didn't realize there was a rule set for remission, so I think that's why it has this structure. But in any case, it's the same effect. So the top node is a half mod, so they structured it as the remission was like a modifier. But it was predicating, so half mod was the top. But that's what we have here. So being in remission is actually represented by 7H. So yeah, so the arrest and the remission overlap. And we can't get any finer grained than that. We can't tell what direction the overlap is. All we can say is that there's overlap. To note the difference, containment, there has to be full containment. They can't share a boundary. Overlap is any kind of overlap, including containment where they share a boundary.
but in this case it would be, so was arrested is included in, was in remission, right? So it would be container?
Yeah, it should be contained.
Yeah.
All right, I gotta change that. Wish I could edit this thing while I was, well, okay, I'll have to remember. Sorry about the bad example. So there's an example. After Abdul Maqsood stated the confiscation will affect the brothers' financial basis, and that's in the future. So none of these examples establish the document creation time, but I think a lot of times what I've seen is the document creation time is like used as the baseline in the first sentence,
Yeah.
and then all of the subsequent sentences like relate to the previous sentence, or whatever makes the most sense.
So you are able to establish not necessarily the immediate previous event or situation, but you can link one to, if it makes more sense, one situation in terms of temporal relation with a previous one, not the one immediately before, in terms of the order of discourse. Yes?
Yeah, I think so. I think the guidelines actually, at one point, they say, don't try to go too far back.
Okay.
The rule that's in the guidelines actually falls apart if you look at the dialogue. So I kind of started it on it. But yeah, don't worry about going too far overboard of it, because these things do tend to kind of get out of control if you start trying to link too many sentences together. Yeah, usually you can just go back to the previous sentence. If you really need to go back a couple sentences, then I think that's fine.
And you can link the same event to a time expression and to another event.
Yeah.
How do you deal with the time expressions of duration?
So there's a duration role at the sentence level. I don't think there's anything in the guidelines about trying to anchor those time expressions at this level. What you can do is the event that has a duration, you place that in relationship to events surrounding it. So maybe there's overlap with another event, but it's probably going to be an event-event relationship rather than having to specify something about that duration phrase. That makes sense.
So you have a role for those time expressions, duration, but you don't link to the event.
It's linked to the event at the sentence level,
At sentence level, you know. Okay.
and I think it just stays at that.
Okay.
So some examples of past reference and present and future. So days of yore, generally in the past. We can't really put that anywhere on the timeline other than past reference is before the document creation time. And present reference is going to generally contain the document creation time, and future reference is going to be after it. But you don't use these for anything other than like vague expressions. It really does not come up very often. There's very little of it, at least in the data sets that I've worked with, and I think in most UMR annotation that's happened already, it's pretty infrequent. But yeah, like nowadays as an example of present, someday as an example of future. And then
These
here's
are only for time expressions, not for the verbs or the situations?
they're for, yes, exactly. Yeah, they're just for time expressions. And then, yeah, so then you know that the popularity, like in this phrase, so someday a new bridge will be popular, that the popularity is linked to someday just through this general temporal relation with the sentence level.
I think you have an example in the guidelines without the time expressions, and you use this past reference
Oh boy.
tag.
Yeah, there are a lot of wonky examples still in the guidelines, especially surrounding this stuff. I think at the point that they were being written, there was a lot that was not quite decided yet. For me personally, I think that section of the guidelines didn't like get finished, and some of the images and supporting stuff, like didn't get put in, and I find it really hard to understand the section of guidelines. And actually, I think that this paper is in this list, but if it's not, so there's Bert's paper, the previous temporal project that this is based on is actually really helpful for understanding the temporal annotation. So I really recommend reading it.
So in principle, you don't annotate the temporal reference for events, for situations. Because if you only use this for temporal expressions, so if I have a sentence, I went to the cinema, something like this, went is not, the temporal location is not represented?
No, it's represented. It gets represented. It'll either be related to document creation time, or it'll be related to a surrounding sentence. So there will be an event-event relationship or an event document creation time relationship.
But it's not the same, right? If you have a temporal relation between two events, so before or after, you don't know if it is in the present, past, or the future.
Yeah, I have that same complaint. I've actually started marking tense on almost every sentence because that is ambiguous.
Yeah.
So you can do that. Probably important. Okay, did we go over both of those? Oh wait, I'm in the wrong place. Okay, and I think we're actually, no, we have 5 minutes left before Bert does Chinese. Okay, let's talk about this. So we have this idea of propositions. There are things that have happened, states of affairs, or things that hold at some point in time that are being discussed. If we're trying to get away from syntax, we have to have some way to decide which things count as events and get certain kinds of annotation in UMR, and which things we don't think are important enough to get, like aspect and modal strength, and be included in the temporal dependency. So here's the general guideline for it. We've got 3 different semantic types, and we've got 3 different modes of expression. So entities would be things like thorns, states would be things like sharpness, processes are going to be anything that happens. Predication is going to be anything that is a verb, obviously, as a predicate. And then anyway, you can spend more time thinking about how things fit into this. But the general rule is anything that is predicated and anything that is a process, no matter how it's expressed, are considered events in UMR that get aspect, they get modal strength annotation, they get included in the temporal dependency. And also they're really, any of these things are good candidates for making a rule set for making rule sets. The sticky part here, and we went back and forth with this for a long time with the UMR group, are actually the states. When you have states in reference, like kindness, theoretically, according to this graph, you wouldn't treat those as events. You wouldn't treat them with aspect or modal strength, but a lot of times they're actually temporally specified. A lot of times they have multiple arguments. I mean, there are times when it just feels really bad not to give those things, aspect and modal strength. So basically, if you run into states in reference that you feel like should have that extra annotation, go ahead and annotate that stuff. I think Bill is kind of operating under this idea. I mean, of course he's right. So much of the time, like that things that are in reference and things that are in modification are more likely to be old information. And if they're old information, they've probably already been established previous in your document. And you're gonna have a relationship between those, co-reference relationship between those events. So, what would an example be? I don't know, like if you had two sentences, like if you said, oh, this man is tall, and then later you referenced, oh, like the tall man. You wouldn't need to give the tall man all of that annotation a second time because it's already been handled earlier on. So I think that he was partly trying to just simplify the annotation process, but it just doesn't always work out that way. We've just run into so many cases where you want to be able to give aspect annotation and temporal dependency annotation to these states that it's okay to do it.
I don't understand why do you consider an event a complement? It's a that clause that you consider annotating as an event? I understand that, for instance, scratch, of course, okay, you annotate as an event, but why a complement? What do you mean?
So if you have, say you have a main clause and a complement clause, that complement clause, let's go processes. So I urged him to go to the store. It's just making it clear that go to the store, even though it's a complement clause and it's not the main clause of the sentence, you still want to annotate it. There's a lot going on here, so we can definitely talk a lot more about this, with the hands-on. Okay. Here we go. Yeah, and just so you know, these are here. It just goes through each of the types specifically and talks more in detail about it. Oh, I think there's one more slide with some examples. Okay, so here are things that look like they might be UMR events, but they're actually not. So you don't have to give these aspect or temporal or modal strength annotation. So the word instructions is ambiguous in English between referring to the event itself or like a paper artifact, like an instruction book. If it's the act itself of giving instructions, it's an event. If it is the paper manual, obviously it is not an event. Even though you're probably going to be using, like the way you would annotate it would be like the paper booklet, it'll be like thing, instrument of, Instructo 1. That Instructo 1, even though you're using like the rule set, you don't have to give that Instructo 1 rule set like modal strength annotation or aspect. Same thing for people and roles. So driver, even though that's going to be a person who's the arg0 of drive, that you don't have to give any of this event annotation to drive. Same with governor, person who's arg0 of govern. Compound, so firing squad. Firing, I think this is the weirdest example, partly because there was no context for it in the guidelines, and I spent a long time trying to figure out what it meant. So there are a lot of different ways you can interpret this phrase. So if it's a hospital and it's on a boat and it's actively floating and you're actually talking about it floating, what did we say? See, this is one of these things where it depends on what you think of floating. So in UMR, they say that like inactive activities like sitting or standing and probably floating, we actually consider them to be states. You still could annotate this as a state if you feel like they're really talking about like the floating event, if it's significant to the discourse. If it's a nonprofit organization and you're just talking about the organization, don't treat it as an event. If it's a boat that's designed to be a floating hospital, but it's like not actually floating, don't treat it as an event. And again, when in doubt, if you have nominalized processes and you don't know what to call it, or other things, you can use process. Okay, I'm gonna wrap up there and then hand it off to Bert.